You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with a columnist for The Eye, Ian Dunt, and the Daily Telegraph's parliamentary sketch writer, Madeline Grant. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Times leads with William, the Prince of Wales, insisting that big tech firms must do more to protect children after an inquiry into the death of the schoolgirl Molly Russell found social media content contributed to her suicide. Molly's case is also the top story for The Guardian. The Telegraph carries an article by the Chancellor, Kwesi Kwarteng, in which he insists the plans he intends to publish in November will bring public spending under control. The Express hears that the financial crisis could lead to a sharp drop in house prices because homeowners will be forced to sell en masse in order to stay afloat. The main story for the FT concerns over what could happen to the pension sector when the Bank of England's protection scheme comes to an end in 2 weeks' time. Polling conducted for The Eye suggests half of those surveyed who voted Conservative at the last election plan not to do so next time round. The Mail reports on the discovery of remains it's believed could be those of 12-year-old Moors murder victim Keith Bennett. That's also the lead story for The Star. And for The Mirror as well, which calls it the dig for the lost victim. While The Sun claims that television presenter Philip Schofield has been dropped as the face of adverts for a car firm, it comes after he and his This Morning co-host, Holly Willoughby, were accused of jumping the queue at the Queen's lying in state, allegations they've both denied. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Ian Dunt and Madeline Grant. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Telegraph and the Chancellor's attempts at reassurance. He's actually written an article in the Telegraph, but promising a new commitment to bring public spending under control. Ian, take us into this.
Yeah, attempts is probably the best word for it. Nothing's changed on the actual policy that he's putting forward. There's certainly no change of course, no U-turn. Nothing's changed on the date. So we still have to wait really for another 2 months before we're going to see any detail whatsoever. What he's really intending is to deliver two separate messages here. The first one is he says, I'm not going to do it. I don't really care if things are unpopular, by which we take it things like the 45p rate on tax. It's just he's not going to make any U-turns there. And the second is really to give us an indication that austerity is coming. Now, you don't have to read tea leaves over the last 24 hours, looking at statements either on the record or off the record from government ministers, and another on the front of the Times by Simon Clarke, who tells us, the Levelling Up Secretary, extraordinarily, that we've been living in a fool's paradise over the last few years, something which may have passed most people by, and that the welfare state is terribly generous and therefore, spending cuts are going to have to come. So the clear message, the really core message that Kwarteng is trying to get over in that Telegraph piece, slightly coded, is buckle up because there's more austerity coming.
Yes, and it says that he's doubling down on the mini budget. Acknowledging that some measures may not be universally popular, but insisting that they had no other choice, Madeline.
Yes, that's the line. And it's one of the curiosities of this last week is just how execrable the comms around all of this has been. We've had several days where we've seen neither hide nor hair of the Prime Minister or many of her ministers. It's had a real feeling of people sort of hunkering down in the bunker and then coming out very belatedly to issue this statement, which, as Ian said, is not particularly substantial. It's just a commitment to publish something more substantial in November. And what I find truly striking is, the way that this was all unveiled on Friday. Somehow the fact that the government was also giving, a very expensive energy bailout to consumers and households. The manner of the unveiling has basically meant that has been completely overshadowed by what is actually a much smaller, worth a lot less tax cut for the wealthiest. It's completely overshadowed the message entirely. And I think the kind of cavalier and abrupt way in which they did that has spooked the markets, obviously, but it's also alienated a lot of MPs who might, in principle, have supported this. It's difficult for them to defend. And it also shows, I think, how they're sort of burning through political capital, long-term political capital that they will need if they're going to bring about the kind of structural reforms, things like planning liberalisation, things that would boost growth, possibly things that would be controversial, like, building another runway at Heathrow. These are the sorts of things that you want to do if you're boosting growth. They've now annoyed their MPs so much that even though in practice they have a majority of over 70, I think, in practice, it may amount to less than that because of the way in which so many of their colleagues have been alienated by the last week's events.
And the Chancellor is certainly sounding still very confident in this article. But what do you make of the OBR chairman saying that the initial forecasts that they will give to the Treasury, they'll be handed to them next week, but they're not going to be made public, Ian?
Yeah, they're being held back so that we can see it all as a package again in 2 months' time. I mean, the OBR, throughout its history, since George Osborne set it up, has played a very delicate game. It's very cautious about making sure it's independent. It says the things that it's supposed to say. It doesn't stray into politics. It's very diligent about keeping that distance from the Chancellor. And until now, until Liz Truss walked into Downing Street, chancellors were very good about treating it with respect. You could say the same thing, by the way, about the Bank of England. When, Gordon Brown made it independent, he was diligent about making sure he didn't start commenting on interest rates. He was very careful to keep that wall there. And the chancellors that followed him behaved in exactly the same way. Now, Truss has been burning down those walls since she came into power. That's certainly the case with the OBR. It was dismissed out of hand when they came in. And that is part of the reason that we have ended up here. The scrutiny that it provides doesn't just improve the quality of the proposals being put forward by the Chancellor. It is noticed as a signal about risk by the markets to go, okay, these guys aren't marking their own homework. They have people there, independent people there, checking what they are doing. So the lack of respect, the dismissal with which it was treated, was part and parcel of the events that we've seen over the last 7 days.
Madeline, the rising cost of mortgages going to affect very, very many people. The Express suggesting that we're heading for a house price slump.
Yeah, it's truly alarming. I mean, it's really hard to think of a time when the mortgage market has deteriorated so quickly, and the amount of chaos and uncertainty that has come in its wake. I mean, because of essentially the semi-collapse of the market, you now have many people who are perhaps tempted to buy or in the process of buying at a loss of of what to do next and how to deal with it. And literally overnight, many properties have become, in practice, unaffordable. And at the same time, you have people who might have been looking for property are backing out of deals, and sellers are giving up. So it's just this kind of wholesale collapse that's happening really quickly, perhaps even quicker than during 2000, at the time of the last financial crisis in 2008.
Yes, Ian, and the Express is quoting mass forced sales, suggesting through HSBC that many homeowners could soon be paying £5,000 more a year to simply keep the roof over their heads.
Yeah, I mean, mortgage holders are going to suffer, and it's going to be covered. It's interesting to see the way it's covered, because journalists, typically speaking, are in exactly that demographic that is most affected by this. Anyone that's sort of in their 30s and 40s right now, late 30s, early 40s, the main conversation that takes place is, so what's going on with your mortgage? Like, how badly are you getting hit right now? And so they're very emotionally engaged, intellectually engaged with the story, and they will cover it hard. The thing is, everyone's going to lose. Everyone's losing from what is happening here right now. If you import products here in order to run a British business, for instance, you are getting hurt right now. The taxpayer is now on the hook for 65 billion in an emergency bailout that we're doing to prevent a run on pension schemes. Like, everybody is hurting, and they're hurting on the basis not even really of the policies themselves. You could have, if you'd staggered this, right, if you really want to pursue a kind of drunken Reaganite agenda, which is essentially what they've decided to do, a kind of sloppy Reaganism. You can do that if you did it slowly and diligently and planned it out and made sure that you understood the proposals that you were putting forward, but they didn't. They were just all over the place, not even a basic level of competence, not even a backsqueak of competence exhibited by them. And everybody, mortgage holders, taxpayers, importers, everyone's going to pay.
Yes, and the results of what we've seen over the last week or so is disastrous polling for the Conservatives, as detailed by the Eye. Not a front page I think they'll relish reading, Madeline.
No, I don't think they will. I mean, the kind of numbers that are being quoted here in the Eye, half of 29 voters abandoning the party. I mean, these aren't just bad polls. These are kind of potentially existential. And, you know, it's the kind of numbers that would make Conservative seats that had previously been regarded as safe as houses suddenly coming into play. And I think for the backbench MPs, I mean, there are some interesting MPs quoted in the voices quoted in some of the newspapers tonight, that veteran MPs are saying that there's no way that they can foresee a victory at the next election. And you have to think, you know, if you're a Tory MP and you're getting probably quite an onslaught from your constituents, even though it seems utterly absurd that the Conservative Party would eject one Prime Minister, appoint another, and then, you know, so quickly the stirrings of mutiny. But as I say, these numbers are the kind that almost a kind of extinction event for the Conservative Party. So there's going to be a lot of muttered whisperings and plotting on WhatsApp groups, and MPs who, looking at the numbers, will think, well, you know, I'm going to be out of a job. And in that situation, they will start to, well, I think it will all get a bit Ides of March if it carries on like that.
Yes, they're quoting one former minister telling the Eye she's finished. There are lots of letters going in. We just have to move on from her quickly now. Sounds like they've made their minds up, Ian.
I mean, she is finished. There's no two ways around it. What this week was elemental in political terms. It's the kind of thing that you talk about in 20 years' time. You know, in 20 years, we'll be sat here and something bad will happen and we'll be like, oh, it's bad, but it's not as bad as, do you remember like the Liz Truss budget? That's like obviously the most apocalyptic budget we've ever seen. That's exactly the way that we'll talk about this. So is she going to be finished in 2 years at the polling booth? Or is it going to be in 1 year by Tory MPs? Or is it even going to be by Christmas? Because I mean, at this rate of catastrophe, it is perfectly believable that they will try and get rid of her by Christmas. People talk about the 1922 committee and which rules. The rules do not matter. Like, we must understand that now after the last few months we've had. Like, they will change the rules whenever they need to change the rules. And if you need to have cabinet secretaries resigning to force their hand, you do it. And if you vote against the finance bill, you do it. And ultimately, there are always ways for you to get rid of a prime minister if you want to. And at the moment, you're looking at the kind of headlines, the polling, the sheer, just almost biblical catastrophe that she has presided over a period of, 7 days. And on that basis, it's pretty clear that they're surely going to have a go.
And they do have form in getting rid of leaders. Can be quite brutal, the Conservatives. Ian and Madeline, for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a break. Coming up, as an inquiry finds harmful social media content contributed to the suicide of the schoolgirl Molly Russell, we'll examine what more big tech firms can do to address the problem. While watching the press preview, still with me in Dunt and Madeline Grant taking us through the newspapers. Let's have a look at The Guardian. Their headline there, social media accused of monetising misery. And these are the words of Molly Russell's father, who's accused the social media firms of doing just that, we've heard today. Ian.
It's a good phrase. It's an interesting phrase. It's the same phrase that's used about extremism with these guys, which is essentially about the algorithm. So I'm not commenting here on the material itself that she would have seen. It's that there is, especially on YouTube, but you get it everywhere in Instagram and other places, that as soon as you look at something, you'll be shown, okay, so this guy likes this, so we're going to show them more of that. And over, and typically that content becomes more and more extreme. There's been quite a few studies that have shown this to be the case now. There've been quite a few studies showing pathways of people from fairly moderate sort of right-wing, nativist, kind of populist right views into really quite scary far-right views by following just the recommendations of the algorithm. And all of that is based on a simple market logic. So like, you like this, would you like some more of this? And if you like this stuff, maybe you like the stuff that's even harder than that stuff. What it demonstrates is that there's no editorial judgment there. There's no social responsibility there. That these guys are not thinking, what is our social responsibility? They're thinking, how can we make more money out of this? And that tends to be the pattern that you see in all these stories, often quite disparate between things like political extremism and items like this.
Yes, and Ian Russell went on to accuse Meta of being dragging Molly into a demented trail of life-sucking content. And the argument is that this could have been prevented. He believes that this could have been prevented. Madeline.
Yes, exactly. And it's exactly as Ian said, what was behind this is the algorithms kind of propelling her further and further into this kind of vortex of, awful content. And in the exchanges in the inquest, Molly Russell's father had particular grievances with the way that the representative from Meta, or as was Facebook, had been discussing the issues and showing so little kind of concern and acknowledgement of, precisely what had been underwriting this.
Yes,
and I think.
Yes, I was just going to summarise his message to Meta, and he says to Mark Zuckerberg, listen to the people who use the platform, listen to the conclusions the coroner gave, and then do something about it. We must leave it there.